Welcome back to Cracking the Code. Today we're covering three powerhouse consulting NAICS codes. We've got 541612, Human Resource Consulting. We have 541613, Marketing Consulting. And last, but certainly not least, 541618, Other Management Consulting. Each of these NAICS codes has their own story, their own spending pattern, and of course, their own opportunities. Bringing the data and insight to the table today is Mon, our brilliant researcher, and Rena, our strategist. So my job is to make sure that this doesn't turn into a procurement marathon. I promise to try to keep this short and sweet. Let's jump into it.
So no promises, but I will try. Hopefully, we will not take as long as I expect.
If it turns long, we'll call it a training session.
I love it. And for our listeners who might be newer to the NAICS codes, Mon, could you give us a quick version of why these three matter?
These NAICS codes represent the federal government's core consulting buy. If an agency hires someone from human capital support, internal communications, outreach, stakeholder engagement, organizational strategy analysis, or general managed help, it is probably getting bought under one of these three NAICS codes. And the interesting part is that while they often overlap, each need has its own spending behavior and agency preferences.
All right, ladies, before we jump in, when we look at the combined trends across fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 24, what really stands out to you?
There are a couple of things that I would like to show you. The first one is that the fourth quarter always shows a noticeable peak. In fiscal year 20, there was a major spike in the second and fourth quarter, but in the years that follow, the rhythm in the first quarter consistently shows the least activity, while the second and third quarter carry a steady movement. And if we also compare it with other NAICS codes that we have covered here at Cracking the Code, the fourth quarter remains the powerhouse.
So the federal government and its love for year-end spending, nothing new here. Let's start with 541612, the HR consulting. Mon, could you give us the backstory behind the numbers without walking us line through the charts? Which pause, I would like to remind our listeners that you can download that full report at our website at www.bidexecs.com. All right, jumping back into it, Mon, to you.
HR consulting under NAICS code 541612 is one of the most structured and disciplined buying areas in the federal space. The cumulative spending from fiscal year 20 through fiscal year 24 shows a clear spread across agencies, with defense leading at about $69 million, USAID following with roughly $41 million, and commerce, agriculture, DHS, and HHS forming the next layers. What this tells us is that HR consulting is not concentrated in one mission area. It supports international development workforce programs, economic programs, agricultural extension initiatives, homeland security workplace planning, everything that agencies might need. It is interesting to note that there are slim numbers of contracts across the board. Normally, with other NAICS codes we have analyzed, we look for agencies that awarded over 100 contracts over the last 5 fiscal years. However, with this NAICS code, we had to lower that threshold. DoD, for example, awarded around 60 contracts over the past 5 fiscal years. HHS, across its various agencies, awarded around 24 contracts, and so on. This case is tough competition for fewer but very lucrative and long-term contracts. The other data point we found is the range of dollar values of contracts. For instance, at HHS, contracts range from 70,000 to around 40 million. Department of Agriculture is another example where contracts range from $32,000 to over $40 million. If you want to check, please go to our report, which breaks down the various agencies and gives out information to find some of the large and small contracts.
A few patterns that I'd like to point out in this data that stands out. Defense and USAID formed the top tier of spending. Defense tends to purchase workforce readiness, training, and sustainment initiatives, while USAID focused on global workforce capacity building, specialized training programs overseas. Below them, you'll see commerce, agriculture, homeland security, health and human services. They all illustrate the middle tier of spending on HR demand across civilian missions. These amounts in our report show that 541612 supports both long-running federal HR initiatives and periodic staffing or workforce modernization efforts tied to evolving agency priorities. Agencies use this code for competency modeling, organizational assessments, training modernization, workforce strategy, work that recurs year after year. The spending trends show periodic increases where agencies are responding to new policy guidance, changes in mission requirements, or shifts in workforce composition. The result is a stable baseline of recurring HR consulting with occasional lifts when agencies need to adapt their workforce to new mandates or strategic directions. Defense and USAID together create an interesting split between domestic and international workforce priorities. This split between the two largest buyers highlights how differently agencies use this NAICS code. Firms succeeding in the NAICS code 541612 tend to show flexibility in how they apply HR methodologies. The pattern here worth noting is that HR consulting under this NAICS code tends to evolve multi-year performance because human capital changes take time. That means opportunities may appear smaller in dollar value, but they're often recurring or follow on in nature. This creates a reliable base for firms that focus on developing strong relationships and demonstrating ongoing value.
So even though the amounts differ by agency, the theme is consistent.
Exactly. HR consulting is routine, necessary, and usually built around multi-year staffing or workforce programs. The opportunities mature at a very steady pace. They tend to be less volatile, and they often reward past performance heavily. If you have done work well once, agencies are likely to trust you again. HR consulting is often a gateway for firms trying to build credibility with an agency. Workforce strategy, training programs give contractors access to leadership. They're mid-level managers, mission owners. These relationships later lead to adjacent work in change management, program improvement, or process modernization. So NAICS 541612 opportunities not just standalone service line, it's a relationship accelerator.
So it sounds like it punches above its weight.
Yes. The dollar values may seem very modest to IT or large enterprise support, but the strategic value of HR work is high. It lets small and firms become trusted advisors.
Like to add a point that further informs what Rina just mentioned about how these NAICS code get away for firms. And the thing is that if you look at our report and see the chart on small businesses versus large businesses in the last 5 fiscal years, you will notice that nearly 75% of the contracts in this NAICS code were awarded to small businesses, but not in any special socioeconomic category. So there is a tremendous opportunity for the businesses without worrying about additional certs to compete and win contracts under these NAICS. And until now, GSA task orders play a minor role in award.
Ladies, that's so much. There is a lot of data to digest just in the little bit that we've covered so far. And for our listeners, as I promised at the start, I'm going to keep this train moving so we don't turn this into a multiple hour discussion because as you can see, it's easy to do. So for our listeners, our intent here is to give you guys just the highlights. If you want a more in-depth look, download our report at our website, www.bitexecs.com. And once you've downloaded it, if you go through it and have more of an in-depth discussion, please reach out to us because that's what we do here at BitExecs. We want to give you data that you can work with. Let's go ahead and move forward, though. I'll move into my favorite one, the marketing consulting. So what does 541613 look like when we take a step back from the generic patterns and study what the agencies are buying? For that, I'm going to need, do you mind helping us here with this NAICS code?
What's interesting about NAICS Code 541 is that the data shows a very specific and somewhat counterintuitive buyer profile. HHS and GSA were top spenders, but we see a new agency pop on the list of top spenders we haven't seen yet, and that it is the National Science Foundation. NSF spent nearly $18 million across only 5 contracts, which is unusually high for a science agency in a marketing mix. Justice also made spending nearly $19 million. Interestingly, while we see DoD typically date our top spending charts, this time DoD did make the list, but is trailing behind with just about $8 million in spending under this NAICS code. State Department and Veteran Affairs sit close together at about $6 million across 9 contracts and $5 million across 12 contracts, respectively. That means the largest concentration of spending is not in traditional public facing agencies, but in science, diplomacy, defense, and veteran services. In each case, the spending is tied to mission communication rather than promotional marketing. NSF uses these dollars for STEAM outreach, scientific awareness, and fellowship communications, while DoD uses it for internal communications, readiness messaging, and workforce engagement. In the case of Department of State, it applied to public diplomacy and stakeholder communication, while VA used it for recruitment support and veteran-facing messaging. This is the actual sign in the data. Agencies are not using NAICS code 541613 for commercial marketing. They use it when they need help communicating something mission critical, either internally or externally.
So the surprise here isn't the amount, it's who's buying and why.
Yeah, it's worth noting for sure. NSF being one of the top agencies is your light bulb moment. Most contractors would never guess that science agencies dominate a marketing consulting spend. But when you think about it, NSF depends on effective communication to attract researchers, inform grantees, build public trust in science, and meet outreach mandates from Congress. Marketing becomes a strategic tool, not a cosmetic one. Because 541613 awards are smaller, they often serve as very manageable starting points for new vendors. We often hear our companies say, hey, can you find me some of those small value contracts, small dollar value contracts? The VA contracts ranged from just under $1,500 to some exceeding $10 million. At DoD, the contracts hovered around 95,000 to about 1.5 million. So very small dollar value contracts. These projects give agencies a way to evaluate a contractor's ability to deliver clear messaging, accurate stakeholder communication, and mission aligned outreach before considering them for some of the larger efforts.
So, ladies, if I look at the quarterly spending patterns in the detailed report, the pattern here isn't in the quarterly chart at all, it's in the buyer profile.
Absolutely. That profile tells companies that if they have strengths in storytelling, outreach, stakeholder mapping, or behavior change communications, they shouldn't ignore agencies like NSF or State Department. Firms positioned with the right messaging and past performance can catch these shifts. But Q4 is still a big award window like all the other NAICS.
And I do want us to talk about small businesses versus large businesses award programs, because I know that is one thing our listeners want to hear about. With these NAICS codes, small businesses have a play, as only 35% of the awards went to large businesses. There was very little use of GSA task orders, but about 20% of the contracts use some sort of contracting vehicle.
Great, ladies. That was yet another insightful discussion, but we're going to keep it moving. All right, so now the general management consulting bucket. 541618. Mon, what does the data say under this NAICS?
What makes NAICS Code 541 stand out is not just the volume of activity, but the type of work agencies purchase under it. The data shows a wide spread of buyers across Treasury, DHS, DOJ, and GSA, each using it for different mission drivers. Treasury leads with about $53 million in cumulative spending tied to financial operations, program oversight, and modernization efforts. Our usual spenders, HHS, dominate the chart, followed by DoD. DHS spends around $35 million, often linked to operational assessments, emergency management support, or mission readiness planning. With the DHS spend around $35 million linked to operational assessments, emergency management support, or mission readiness planning. DOJ appears in our top spender list with about $12 million tied to program evaluation, workflow improvement, or organizational studies. Even GSA shows some activity with spending to support interagency initiatives. Numbers, the buy pattern timeline is where the signal comes clearer. Agencies tend to use the NAICS code 541618 to launch early year strategic assessments, business process reviews, and organizational diagnostics that shape their program spending for the rest of the fiscal year. These are the foundation setting efforts that allow agencies to make informed budget decisions, respond to leadership priorities, or recalibrate ongoing programs.
So firms offering management consulting might find their big moment earlier in the fiscal year.
Exactly. The third quarter has a unique nuance here. While typically quieter, fiscal year 24 shows a noticeable lift in the third quarter spending. This could reflect agencies accelerating program adjustments mid-year or responding to a new directives. But it is too early to call it a long-term pattern. We will have to check the data going forward to inform you otherwise. What it does shows is that the NAICS code 541618 has more variability than HR or marketing consulting, and firms shouldn't assume that the third quarter is always a dead space.
Yeah, that's a strategic takeaway. Agencies use 541618 when they need clarity. Clarity on process bottlenecks, program performance, workforce alignment. These are not discretionary buys, they are foundational. And because these assessments often dictate the direction of later year spending, being engaged early isn't optional. For firms in this NAICS code, Q1 is when you influence, Q2 is when you win, Q3 is when you stay ready for sudden opportunities, Q4 is when you follow on or look for downstream tasking that materializes.
Thank you, guys. And now that we've really talked specifics here, Rena, could you tie it all together for us? What should consulting firms be doing with this information?
3 things. First, treat each NAICS code as its own market. For example, HR consulting lives on a predictable Q1 to Q4 buying curve. Marketing consulting rewards mid-year agility. Management consulting peaks in Q2. So your pipeline should reflect these differences. Second, decide whether you're going after direct contracts or vehicle-driven work. HR has more direct pathways. Marketing and management consulting often flow through task orders, BPAs, or larger vehicles. Position accordingly. Third, build credibility assets tied to these patterns. Targeting 541618, which should show its ability to influence year-end strategy. A marketing firm should highlight its agility for mid-year communication pivots. And HR firms should focus on consistency and reliability.
So it sounds like these firms don't just need a capability statement, they need a capability strategy.
Agencies don't just need to know what you do, they need to know where you fit into their mission.
All right, ladies, this has been great, but I want to close with a few practical takeaways.
If you're in HR, plan Q2 shaping and Q4 awards. If you're in marketing, treat Q3 as a live opportunity window for yourself. And if you're a management consulting firm, prepare to win in Q2. Refresh those micro decks, narrow your messaging, prioritize relationships with prime contractors with the multiple award IDIQs that dominate this field.
That was a great breakdown. Thank you, Rena. Thank you, Mon. And for our listeners who want the detailed charts for agency level spend, individual NAICS comparisons, visit the link in the episode's description and download the full report. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Cracking the Code.